Well, Mountaineer Nation, that one was a doozy. Maybe even more so than last week against Kansas, as our beloved Mountaineers fall at home 48-14, dropping their overall record to 2-3, conference record to 0-2. Meanwhile, Utah, it might have just been one bad week for them against a top 10 opponent in the country in Texas Tech a week ago. Instead, they improved to 4-1. Now 1-1 in conference play, a game that I was able to attend at Milan Puskar Stadium, as evidenced by my baby blue 1965 commemorative towel that they gave to all of the fans in the stadium. So, just a shout out to all of the fans who packed the stadium for this one. I mean, I don't think it wasn't nearly as close to as full as the Backyard Brawl just a couple of weeks ago, but maybe in the ballpark of somewhere around 70 to 75%. I didn't look up the official attendance for this game, but I mean, sitting down in the lower section, ticket prices for this one really dropped right up before game time, so I was able to sit down in the lower bowl for pretty cheap prices. And looking around the stadium, everybody kind of dressed out in their ponchos and rain gear. And it was a pretty decent crowd there in the first half. So shout out to everybody who made it. It was so funny just living here, about 50 minutes away in Cannonsburg, just over the border in Washington County. It was beautiful. It was like sunny and 75, barely any clouds, and then bam, right as we about hit the border there in Greene County, the sky was completely overcast and the rain came in. Excuse me, battling through just a bit of a cold. So it was just such a weird scenario. And I mean, we were checking the Doppler radar and it just looked like a, big green yellow blob was coming up from the south, and it just cut right there around the West Virginia border. So it was rain, it was kind of nasty. Definitely didn't have the kind of pregame festivities that you had of the Backyard Brawl, but good crowd. Blue Lot was filled. People seemed like they were in good spirits, although much quieter than the Backyard Brawl, I think, given the weather and the opponent. So, shout out to you, Mountaineer Nation, for bearing down the hatches and sitting through that. Now, unfortunately, our Mountaineers really were overmatched from the get-go. Those 1965 commemorative uniforms, I mean, while looking really, really nice, especially the helmets, beautiful. I think you can burn those. Because this was not one that you're going to look into the annals of history and be like, ooh, that was... Utah has West Virginia's number 3 times now in program history. The Utes just rolled over in this one. Let's talk about the game itself real quickly, and then I want to talk about some of the bigger picture things, because being such a non-competitive contest, there's not much really to take away from this game that you want to truly analyze or big picture. Big picture, yes, but it's not like we can kind of break down the nuances and moments of this game like we could with the Backyard Brawl, because it just was uncompetitive. So I was really impressed right off from the get-go how easily Utah quarterback Devin Dampier and the Utah offense drove right down the field and scored on their very first 2 possessions. They didn't let the rain bother them. They called pretty easy pass plays to convert, ran at will, used that offensive line with a couple of NFL draft picks on it, and they just wore West Virginia down. They're big, they're huge, they're physical. That's the way that Utah wants to play, and that's how I hope that West Virginia can get to as a program through roster management into the future. Just big, strong, fast, take heads, take no prisoners approach. That's the kind of football that West Virginia wants to get to. Then at the beginning of the second quarter, West Virginia decides to go for it on 4th and 2 at the Utah 42. Nickelback Smith Snowden, who was everywhere in this game, just like I talked about in the preview show, drops an interception throw right to him, hit him right in his hands. Jalen Henderson was trying to hit Jeff Weimer on a quick slant route on 4th and 2. Utah takes it right back down the field for 6, 21-0. Now, West Virginia doesn't get it on another 4th down attempt, this time in its own territory on the next possession, but Dampier gifts the Mountaineers with a turnover on Utah's very next play, throwing up a wounded duck prayer, intercepted easily by cornerback Nick Taylor. West Virginia picks up a first down, but is forced to punt. Then Utah goes on maybe its most impressive drive of the entire contest. 94 yards, scoring with just 13 seconds before halftime. And that's when the crowd, including my mom, my dad, one of my best friends who was in attendance of this game with me, we just knew down 28-0 with that kind of offense in the rain, it was really enough suffering right there. Call us fair weather fans, whatever you want to do. But I mean, that's exactly what 50% of the crowd at Milan Puskar Stadium also knew. So down 28-0. That was the largest good stat I heard on the review show from Mike Kazaza and Chris Anderson. That was the largest deficit that West Virginia has faced at the end of a first half. As their time in the Big 12 conference. So I've been to some stinkers. I was at Kansas State last year. I was at Oklahoma State in 2021. I wasn't at the game against Kansas State where they scored like 38 points in the first half against Garrett Green. I think that was in 2022, but at least that one was interesting from an offensive perspective, even though West Virginia played no defense. It just, it was all one-sided. Utah is a very competitive, disciplined team. They didn't have to do anything difficult. They just outmatched West Virginia at every single position. And, most notably quarterback, you got a good Devin Dampier occasion. Their offensive line held West Virginia's defense in check, and he completed passes. I mean, his first touchdown pass, I think it was Dallin Bentley or Jackson Benny. I mean, just straight up beat Kokora Tarnu on a jump ball. I mean, easy. Threw beautiful passes on this day, easy completions, and they could still run the ball and West Virginia really missed tackles. I really was a little bit frustrated because I felt like the defense kind of let up. Missed tackles, coverage assignment mess ups. Just like I said, letting up easy completions on routes that didn't look or anything complex or unique out there. I just don't think that they had any confidence because they knew that they weren't going to get any support from the WVU offense, and that's a red flag. That is what crept into this program at the end of last year, knowing about Neil Brown's team. We saw that in the Texas Tech game. After the Baylor game last year, it was just kind of like kind of mailing it in for the season. And so that's a problem. Just because I've seen this enough over the course of the last, 5-6 years now, where when the defense starts to get frustrated, trying to, give everything that it can out there all the time, and you're just getting mercilessly attacked by your opponent's offense, I know that you can't give up. Take a team like Iowa out there who gets absolutely nothing from its offenses week in and week out, yet the defense for not just, years, decades, however, that is their DNA out there. So you have no excuse. You have no excuse not to go out there and give it your all every single play. And we're starting to see some new players changing, playing time and getting snaps and getting involved. So that's excellent. So if you see any sort of that kind of lack of effort, that lack of hard edge mentality, West Virginia's got to make moves. On Zach Alley and Rich Rodriguez, I know he's kind of given autonomous control over to Zach Alley. But, those defensive coaches, if they're seeing any sort of let up, anybody hanging their heads down, West Virginia can't afford that. And that's what I felt like was happening there in that first half. Very frustrated by the West Virginia offense not being able to pick up any first downs, keep them in. It's like a pitcher who gets no run support. That's probably the best sports analogy that I can give you out there, is that if your pitcher, your defense is trying to go out there, they get you an interception, and you reward them on the opposite way by not getting points out of it. And how many times now has West Virginia just come up empty on any sort of turnovers? So that's what I think is a little bit frustrating to the West Virginia defense when you don't play complementary football. So that's something to track, I think, especially through next week against BYU, because BYU is going to be another tough opponent just like Utah. And then you can reevaluate after this bye week. But for right now, I know this defense, and like you might say to yourself, this is now 2 weeks in a row that West Virginia has given up over 40 points. I'm not ready to sell this defense out. I still think there's a lot of talent Michael Coates especially. Maybe no one wants to throw at Michael Coates, so it's kind of hard to evaluate him. But when he does, he steps up and make plays. But that's just what I'm saying is I just think that the defense is getting a little bit frustrated with the offense not giving them anything, being back out onto the field, and I think that opponents are now scouting West Virginia pretty well, understanding who's in their roles at what positions, and they're knowing how to attack it. So, one change, if you want to make that flip already, Kokora Tarnu at safety happened in the second half. Derek Carter came in and played a really stout performance. I think that's one position that you can make a change already. And that was just one that was kind of obvious to me. And then we can talk about some other positions down the road. But I hope that this was enough evidence for the Nico Marchiol haters out there that Jalen Henderson wasn't the unequivocal answer, that it wasn't just so obvious that you needed to get him out of there. Because, I appreciate some of the hero ball that he was playing out there to try and pick up first downs with his legs, but he just gives you nothing in the pass game. Devin Dampier had 3 touchdown completions in the first half. Jalen Henderson just had 3 completions. So, I want to say, because this is why I always talk about the weather in my preview videos, that the weather sometimes can play a factor within the game, but it didn't affect Devin Dampier. Nope, he didn't care. He could play through that. He could sling accurate passes in that rain. So, I just think that this passing game is a wreck. It's a mess. I don't think it has any sort of idea of what it wants to be, what it wants to do. Thankfully, there were some times, I think it was in the second quarter, just Jalen Henderson just took the snap, threw it up down the field as a wing and a prayer, and Utah held Cam Vaughn for a defensive pass interference, so West Virginia was able to get 15 yards out of it. So take that as first downs. But just, I don't see any sort of cohesion within that passing game between the receivers, between the quarterback. I know that this offensive line is just giving but the offensive line actually in pass protection was half decent yesterday. Still gave up sacks, but they were giving more time than I think that Kansas allowed for. So I don't know if they have figured out who they want to use at wide receiver, kind of what their roles are within the offense. I don't have the statistics just right now. I didn't look that up. But West Virginia's got to be one of the bottom of the barrel teams in the country in pass yardage per game. So if you're just going to try and commit to this, try and figure out this run game, which is, because you don't have Jaheim White, Ty Edwards doesn't decide to play for another straight game, you're kind of, I feel like, behind the 8 ball already, because you don't have a good line, you don't have your best running backs in there. Now I'll talk about one who I think actually did really step up, but so you got to throw the ball, and just where was a bubble screen? Where were some tunnel screens? Where were some screens to the backs? I just think that you can be a little more creative than what Rich Rodriguez has been doing so far this season. It looked really good week 1 against RMU, and West Virginia's just, I think one screen was thrown. And it was early on in the contest over to Cam Vaughn, and I think he only got like 2 yards, but completely went away from that for the rest of the game. So these opponents are realizing if you just put pressure on the wide receivers, West Virginia doesn't have the connection between the quarterbacks and the receivers to throw the ball over the top. And that's now concerning, because not so much on this staff, but that's now a 2-year trend. That was why West Virginia was able to be pretty successful offensively in 2023, because they could run the ball really, really strong, and they had a downfield passing attack with Garrett Green, Devin Carter. You can remember how West Virginia, big time throws was something that Pro Football Focus really rewarded Garrett Green for in 2023, and then boom, fell off a cliff, not as good last year, and now this year it sounds like you're starting from scratch. So I know that was really a hallmark of the Jacksonville State offense last year, and just maybe, again, because of the offensive line, that West Virginia just doesn't feel like it has the confidence in its ability to get enough time for receivers to create separation, no matter whether they're going way downfield, whether they're going on their mesh concepts, and But I mean, Cam Vaughn caught one pass in that game. I think. Let me see what his longest catch, because it was a really nice play. Henderson eyed him up, went across the field. I think like playing NCAA 26. It's like a mountain trail or whatever. He just kind of came across in motion, scattered right across the field. And yeah, had a 39-yard pickup in this game. So it's possible. I just think that this offense needs more time. I think that the bye week couldn't come soon enough. I think that West Virginia it would be really nice if West Virginia had it this week instead of 2 weeks from now. But maybe that's more of the phase 2 of this offense that will be coming. That's now that we're still just 5 games into the season. But I really hope that this pass attack in the second half can look a step better than it's looked like in this first half of the season, because it's an absolute mess. So some players who stepped up in the second half, I got to give some shout outs for. Really liked what I saw out of Khalil Wilkins. I think it's kind of obvious comparative to what Jalen Henderson gave you in the first half. Just 6 attempts, 3 completions, but 63 yards and a touchdown. And then what he gave you on the ground, 9 carries for 39 yards. Redshirt freshman. That was the most, I think, time that he's gotten sustainably for a game. I think Max Brown came in for like the last series or 2, or then he got hurt, and then Wilkins came back in. But I mean, Wilkins was under pressure, running for his life at some points in times, and was able to handle it with confidence, with grace, and with focus. So I liked what I saw out of him, and being able to run the ball, good enough speed. Just he's thin. So can he hold up from taking any sort of big hits from those guys like on Utah or BYU in upcoming weeks? But he's a lefty. Really watching the second half on television, really was in with Pat White, talking it over on the sidelines on what he was doing. And I just think, like, at this point in time, Jalen Henderson is really just kind of playing hero ball for himself. This is his last year. He's not going to be playing in the NFL. So he's just doing whatever is for him. And that's going bigger picture. Maybe I'll put a pin in that and come back to it, because this was my fear, is if the season kind of went south early, you have so many one-year guys on this offense, how are you able to coach them up? How are you able to get them to buy into a team concept instead of an individual, goals and desires? That's I'll put a pin in that. Also, Dior Hubbard looked really good at times in this game. 10 carries for 61 yards and a touchdown. Had a long rush of 29 on this day. And then also, I think he contributed. No, he didn't contribute in the receiving. So, I don't think necessarily a little too late at this point in time. But welcome, Dior Hubbard. Welcome. Would have liked to have you early on in the season, especially when Jaheim White went down with an injury week 2 against Ohio. And then, last week against Kansas a little bit more. But maybe Dior Hubbard, now that he's got his feet under him, he can come in there and be your starting running back 1 if Ty Edwards is going to continue to be hampered by that hip pointer injury. But, hopefully next week, now 2 weeks, again, depending upon how severe that hip pointer injury was, if it was just something that was kind of mild, 2 to 3 weeks, Ty Edwards is right in that period of where that he could be returning back for the Mountaineers. Definitely, I would think after the bye week, but again, then only playing majority of snaps, only 1 game out of your first 6. How does he factor into the team's plans in the back half of the season, with only this year's worth of eligibility left? Also, right tackle Malik Agbo. Really good review by the Fox Sports television crew. Malik Agbo really sprung Jared Bowie way downfield on that block to spring him for that 68-yard rush in the second half. So love that. Think Malik Agbo deserves some time because he has eligibility for next season instead of Tyquise Crawford there at right tackle. Also Donovan Haslam, who has another year's worth of eligibility, in for Kimo Makaneole, who apparently went down with an injury in this game, or was it just due to poor performance so far this season? And then Rodney Gallagher. He really got screwed on that touchdown reception, offensive pass interference that was called on him late in the third quarter. That was so ticky-tack. I don't think there was any pass interference either on the defensive side or the offensive side. Comes away with a catch, nullified. West Virginia doesn't get a fourth down conversion, so they lose out on points. Didn't really factor into the decision. But Rodney Gallagher, I feel like, is starting to put it together, y'all. I wish that he could contribute more in special teams. Truly, I wish that was part of the facet of his, game for this program and what he's able to contribute. But I think he's starting to figure it out on the offensive side of the ball, and I think he'll continue to contribute this season and then sticking around for his senior season next year. On the defensive side of the ball, I only really have three. Nick Taylor, I gave him a shout out on Locked On West Virginia, Mountaineer Paul's show a couple of weeks ago. I think he's the understudy to Jason Chambers in Rod West secondary. I think Nick Taylor's going to be a starter next year, and thank goodness that West Virginia has some depth in that cornerback room to rely on some seniors to develop some younger guys, and that you hope once Jason Chambers, Michael Coates graduate this offseason, you can pencil them in. Nick Taylor's not going to get poached by some SEC program out there, and bam, you don't have to invest so much at that one position in roster management. That Nick Taylor's, you can say confidently, hey, we at least have one starter there at cornerback with years of eligibility. Also, Derek Carter, once Kakura Tarnu exited the ballgame and Carter came in, he did really well for the West Virginia defense. I know it was kind of against Utah's second teamer, but finished tied for the lead with Nick Taylor. Also, Fred Perry with 8 total tackles. 7 of them were solo, so the most solo tackles of any Mountaineer defender. 2 tackles for loss on the day for Derek Carter. I know he's in his last year's worth of eligibility, but I think that's a move you make right now, starting Derek Carter over Kakura Tarnu at one of those safety positions. And then Bandit, outside linebacker Curtis Jones, just continues to impress me. Moving on week in and week out. Transformed his body this offseason, playing up at 225, 6'4". I wish that he would have got that redshirt year last year to save in his year's worth of eligibility, but from a guy who was kind of, I don't say this in any sort of disrespectful terms, but maybe was a bit of a project player, maybe a true athlete, as now it looks like he's found his position there at that edge rushing bandit outside linebacker position. So I like that. I think you'll continue to see a little bit still, more of a rotation. Braden Siders, Jamori Robinson, Curtis Jones, Marshawn Oxley's been getting some time here and there in some positions, and Oxley's got eligibility for next season. But I think Curtis Jones working his way up the list of top tacklers on this defense, and that's a really nice thing to see, I feel like, in his second year in Morgantown. Guy who was, borderline 2 to 3 star recruit, in-state kid. So sticking around, I think he's going to be, again, somebody that you can kind of say, as a foundational piece, for next year's defense, that like maybe we don't need to go out there and sign the reigning defensive player of the year from the American Conference in Jamori Robinson. We really like what we have there in Curtis Jones Jr. at outside, bandit linebacker. So those are my 3, or 5 on the offensive side of the ball, 3 on the defensive side of the ball that I think are kind of your silver linings of individual performance in this game. But I would say bigger picture, the revelations from this game against Utah is that West Virginia, unfortunately, much to the chagrin of myself and some of the more optimistic, fans and YouTube content creators out there, is just unfortunately not talented enough to score with the upper and middle tier of this Big 12 conference. I was a bit wrong, seeing some of the, games that took place over week 1 and week 2, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, that the SEC and especially the upper part of the Big Ten looked as if they had so much more quality. And if you look at the top 25 rankings, it's still pretty heavily dominated by SEC and now Big Ten teams. But man, I think that this Big 12 conference, from a top 6, top 7 standpoint, can go with any of those other leagues out there this year. I mean, it is not a clear-cut thing to say, like, man, the SEC and the Big Ten are just far and away so superior. Again, top 7 teams from the Big 12 this year, because Texas Tech and Iowa State can play. I just put out my top 25 rankings on Twitter. So follow me over on Twitter at Carson_Fox27 if you're a Twitter X user. I think Texas Tech and now Iowa State are top 10 teams in the country. So, ASU now up there, I think in the top 20 after beating TCU, who just jumped into the top 25 this past week. BYU hanging in there at 25th. So I don't know if West Virginia can beat any of those 4 upcoming opponents on its schedule in the back half. So I kept saying, if you go into the bye week, say 2-4, maybe is there a bit of a 2021 feel that if you win your home contests or, win against UCF, Houston, and who's the other one? Houston and Colorado, maybe steal one from those 3 opponents in TCU, ASU, or Texas Tech, you could get to 6-6 and win a bowl. I just don't know. I just don't see it. I don't see enough talent, especially with the injuries that have mounted up, unfortunately, this year, that I think you might see more results like we've seen these last couple of weeks. Because, freaking Kansas, and I got called out by some Kansas commenter on my recap video from last week when I just said that, wasn't super impressed with Kansas to the point that I'm, should be getting down on my hands and knees and praising them like they're the Gale Sayers led 60s teams of the Kansas Jayhawks. They get beat by Cincinnati yesterday. So, come on. I called it. I knew it. Kansas, good team, middle tier. I think they could finish somewhere for 5-7, but now, maybe 7th after losing that game to Cincinnati. And I don't even think Dante Corleone played in that game. So the Big 12, very competitive this year. It's just unfortunate that all of this, with the injuries, all the new players, tough schedule, that are affecting West Virginia at this point in time already in the season, that you kind of feel like, whoa, we need to reevaluate what are our goals. Is this a year 0? Hoppy Kercheval already said on 3 guys before the game, no, I don't think this is year 0, but it's just really, really tough to evaluate anybody, especially at the skill position players, because of this offensive line. So moving forward, again, I think you could use this bye week, in 2 weeks as an opportunity to regroup, recalibrate, reevaluate where you want to go moving forward. But I think you have to give the 1-year guys one more week. Tough, maybe the toughest road game that West Virginia has left on its schedule, up there to Provo, Utah, and that crazy crowd on such a short week, before you commit to any sort of a youth movement. And even then, I think going full scale out there of just playing underclassmen and foregoing any of the guys who have 1 year's worth of eligibility, you can't do that because you've already spent the NIL money on so many of these guys. There's some like Michael Coates out there who have prospects of playing in the NFL. So I think you're doing a disservice to guys like that who come in on 1-year deals to just forego playing time for him for younger players out there, because you're going to need to do that again this upcoming offseason, y'all. You're going to have to reload, maybe not so much with 80 players, but I think it's going to have to be somewhere in the ballpark of around 40 to upgrade at some of these specific positions that I'll talk about later this fall that we've seen. So I think 1 more week, giving these 1-year guys full autonomy in their positions of who's healthy. So if that even means, again, Jalen Henderson getting the start, if Nico Marchiol isn't healthy enough to go, Then you do that, and then you go in with a full 2 weeks and more to really hit the ground hard with practice and work on some of these younger guys to get them ready for a game against UCF on the road that you're hopefully competitive in and that you can potentially even win in with some of these underclassmen. So that's what you're kind of gotta take out the chaff and find who are, as I've been saying all season, who are your best 300, but balancing those guys who have extra years worth of eligibility for next year versus just these 1 year guys who are going to be gone at the end of the season. So other thing, big picture that I got to take away from this game specifically that we can talk about within the recap is that you have to invest, as we've seen now 5 games in, next year into this offensive line. I've said this, I think, in some comments on some of my videos, or might have said this on Mountaineer Paul's show, is that I think that the investment this past offseason had to be so heavily put into the defensive side of the ball to get them up to a point that was competent enough to even allow for 48-14 games like this. There was just total volume, so much of a loss on the defensive side of the ball. You had to go out there. You had to spend the money on a Michael Coates. You had to go out there and get a Jamori Robinson, even though he's only played 2 games so far this season. I think the commitment had to be put into the defensive side of the ball, and then you would have hoped that with Rodriguez's experience, what West Virginia had coming back at quarterback and Marchiol running back and Jaheim White, and they could fill in here and there, at receiver with Cam Vaughn, going out there and getting Grayson Barnes, and then just kind of winging it. That West Virginia has overachieved with some smaller offensive linemen. You can't do that. Not in this league. Not against some of the defensive lines that you're facing. You have to go out there next year and go at, and you're going to have some guys coming back with years worth of eligibility. So you're not doing a complete total rebuild on the offensive line. Now Nick Cray will get 12 games worth of experience, so he's not going in completely inexperienced to next year. Hopefully it's a short-term injury for Landon Livingston that he can come back. After the bye week, he's got another year's worth of eligibility. So that's 2 starters already on your offensive line that you're not having to totally replace for next year. But, on the right side of the line, if you can't find it, either in, Josh Isosa from Oklahoma, if he gets in later in the season, Malik Agbo out of Texas at right tackle, and then if you're continuing to trot out Walter Youngbear, or maybe Cooper Young gets healthy enough, I don't know how long his foot injury is going to keep him out, finding some options with who are underclassmen, or then, man, we really got to go out there, and if Khalil Wilkins is going to be our quarterback for next year, a lefty, go out there and get a solid right tackle on the market, and maybe have to overpay to do so. But that's what you got to do, I feel like, on this offensive line. It's just holding West Virginia back from showing any sort of potential of what it can be in the future, and you have to be able to sell that to the fans. Because, stupidly, but I'm seeing this on social media, some fire Rich Rodriguez chants have already come down at some games. Come on, get over yourselves. Like, what? Why? But then the other thing, big picture, and this was just watching Utah. I was sitting on the Utah side, so I was able to watch them warm up, seeing them on the sidelines. They're freaking huge, y'all. I know that comment that came down, I think like in 2022 about Neil Brown's teams being, as big as MAC teams out there. And whether that's justified or unjustified, if you want, football is a game of the biggest and the strongest out there. And you just looked up and down that, some Samoans, we need some Samoans on this team. Just like big 6'5", 340 kind of guys out there. Tight end especially. How many freaking big, giant tight ends does Utah have? Everyone within the defensive front 7. And that's why when I look, at West Virginia's recruiting out of high school, and, we'll talk about recruiting down the road as we get later to the end of the season and then signing day and stuff like that, is I just hope that West Virginia is trying to prioritize that Rodriguez has learned, this is not the old Big East. This is the Big 12 where you got to get some 300-pounders on your defensive line. Your linebackers have to be pushing closer to 250. You got to get big guys on your offensive and defensive lines. And then you got to have a big running back. You got to have a big linebacker, because that's what these other opponents are bringing to the table and saying, let's go mano-a-mano, and we're going to try and crush you for fourth quarters. So you have to have the big enough bodies to go up and withstand that, even if it's sacrificing some speed. You know, I mean, you'd love to have speed. That's the calling card of the West Virginia, Rich Rodriguez's, teams on both sides of the ball. But you need some bigger bodies out there to be able to compete against some of these bigger teams out there. I don't know what they're feeding those boys that are like west of the Mississippi. But man, are just some of these opponents that West Virginia plays in the Big 12 just built differently. So if you've been at any games, especially that one yesterday against Utah, do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Like, Utah kind of could get away with some smaller guys in the secondary at running back, even at quarterback. Dampier, only 5'11", but built 210, like stocky, and could take and deliver hits whenever he'd run the ball. That's what I love to have speed, but you got to be able to withstand those hits. So I'd love to know your feedback. Leave your comments here on YouTube. And if you've liked this video, please like it so more Mountaineer fans can see it across YouTube. I'd love to have you a subscriber to my channel, even though I know it's kind of difficult to continue to sustain interest, to watch, follow all of the inner workings. There's still things that you can take away, that if you're a hardcore fan like myself, that we're looking at some individual performances and how does that impact the big picture for moving forward. Because that's the beauty of college football and this West Virginia program. There's a game next week. There's a game next season. So there's always something to talk about, and we can analyze it. So thank you. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be back later this week if maybe I have some special content on some other thoughts that I'm kind of mulling over and some things that I'm monitoring, or we'll definitely have our preview show next Friday morning, even though it's a Friday night kickoff against BYU. We'll have our preview show for that and continue to follow this season. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your dog. I do this each and every week and have a lot of fun doing it. We'll talk later this week, everybody. Hail West Virginia. Let's go spot the ball.